On the morning they cleared out my grandmother's house, I found the deed sewn into a quilt. Not tucked beneath it, not folded inside a pillowcase. Sewn into it. Hidden between the batting and the backing, stitched along 3 sides, like a secret the quilt had been keeping for 30 years. I only found it because the seam had started to work loose at the corner, and when I pressed the fabric flat to fold it, I felt the crinkle of paper beneath my fingers. I stood in my grandmother's bedroom with the quilt across my arms and the late afternoon light coming in through the curtains. She'd hung herself sometime in the 60s, and I didn't move for a long time. My name is Maya Vance. I was 17 years old the morning Eleanor Vance was buried, and 18 by the time I understood what she had left me. The day the caseworker came to the house, I had already packed. Not because anyone told me to, because I knew the rhythm of these things by then. My mother had been gone 3 years. My father had been gone longer than that, in all the ways a person can be gone without actually leaving. Eleanor, my grandmother, had been the one constant. The woman who drove 40 minutes each way to bring me to school, who kept a spare bedroom with my name on a piece of masking tape on the door, who made coffee so strong it sat in the mug like something you had to earn. When she died in February, the county didn't pause to ask what I needed. They sent Mrs. Albright, who arrived with a clipboard and tired eyes and a voice that had learned long ago how to be kind without being warm. She told me I could stay in the house for 2 weeks while the estate was processed. After that, I would be placed in transitional housing until I turned 18, at which point the county's obligation to me would conclude. She said it plainly. The way you say a thing when you've said it so many times, it no longer feels like a verdict. I had 1 bag. Inside, 2 sweaters, a pair of boots, the worn paperback Eleanor had read to me when I was small, and a photograph of her standing in front of something I'd never been able to identify in the background. A wide, flat landscape, fence posts, the edge of something large and low on the horizon. I'd always meant to ask her what it was. I never did. Mrs. Albright left me a check for $150 and a phone number for the Transitional Placement Office. She said to call by Friday. I spent those 2 weeks in Eleanor's house the way you spend time in a place you know you're leaving, slowly, taking stock of things, trying to memorize the smell of it, old furniture polish and lye soap and the faint sweetness of the dried lavender she hung in bundles from the kitchen beams. I went through her things carefully, not looking for anything in particular, just trying to be present with what remained of her. The quilt was the last thing I folded. I sat on the edge of her bed with the paper in my hands. It was a property deed, handwritten in the formal language of county records, dated 1951. It transferred ownership of a parcel of land in Callaway County, 340 acres on the eastern rim of a valley called Heron's Flat, to one Eleanor Ruth Vance, née Holloway, in consideration of services rendered and debts forgiven. At the bottom, in smaller print, was a notation I had to read 3 times before it registered. Mineral survey pending, water claim uncontested, grazing rights retained in perpetuity. Below the deed, folded separately, was a single sheet of paper in Eleanor's handwriting. Not a letter exactly, more like a list of instructions. At the top, she had written, "For Maya, when the time comes." I didn't read the rest of it that night. I folded both pieces of paper carefully and put them back between the batting and the backing, and I took the quilt with me when I left. The transitional housing was a room in a converted house on the north end of town, shared with 2 other girls I barely spoke to. The walls were thin, the radiator knocked all night. I kept Eleanor's quilt on the bed and slept under it every night for 3 months. And every morning, I woke up knowing what was sewn inside it. The week I turned 18, I finally read the rest of the note. Eleanor's handwriting was deliberate and slightly formal, the way her speech had been. Nothing wasted, nothing ornamental. She wrote, "The deed is real and it is yours. I kept it hidden because there are people who knew about that land and wanted it before you were born, and I did not trust that they had stopped wanting it. The ranch at Heron's Flat has been leased to a cattle operation for 20 years. The lease expires the spring after you turn 18. You will need a lawyer. Go to Arthur Abernathy in Callaway. Tell him Eleanor sent you. He has been waiting." She wrote, "I am sorry I didn't tell you this in person. I kept meaning to wait until you were older. I kept thinking there would be more time. There is never as much time as you think there will be." She wrote, "The land is yours, the same way your name is yours, because it was given to you by someone who loved you, and no one can take a name." I read it twice. Then I folded it back into the quilt and lay there looking at the water stains on the ceiling of that room, and listening to the radiator knock, and thought about a valley called Heron's Flat that I had never seen, and that was, apparently, mine. Callaway County was 6 hours by bus. I went on a Tuesday because the fare was cheaper midweek. I brought the quilt in a canvas bag over my shoulder because I didn't want to leave it behind, and I sat in the back of the bus and watched the landscape open up as we moved east. Fields wider, sky bigger, the geometry of the land flattening out into something that felt older and less complicated than the city. Arthur Abernathy's office was on a side street off the main square in Callaway, in a building that smelled of old paper and brass polish. He was a compact man in his 70s with white hair and a habit of pausing before he spoke, as if he ran every sentence through a private inspection before releasing it. When I told him Eleanor had sent me, he set down his pen. "I wondered when you'd come," he said. He knew the deed. He had a copy of it himself, along with a survey map, a file of correspondence going back 15 years, and a folder of documents I didn't fully understand until he walked me through them one by one. The lease on the Heron's Flat property had been held by a cattle operation called Titan Holdings for 22 years. That lease expired in April. Titan Holdings had been attempting to purchase the land outright for the last decade. But the deed had never surfaced, and without it, the title had remained unresolved. They'd been working with a county official named Mr. Henderson, who had systematically delayed the title search every time it came close to resolution. "Your grandmother was no fool," Abernathy said. "She knew that if that deed came to light while she was alive and you were still a minor, someone would find a way to complicate your claim. She kept it hidden until you were of age." I asked him what the land was worth. He folded his hands. "The acreage alone, at current grazing land rates, is significant. But that isn't the main question." He opened the survey map and turned it toward me. "Are you familiar with what a mineral survey pending notation means?" I said I wasn't. He spent the next 30 minutes explaining it. The survey from 1951 had flagged the eastern portion of the Heron's Flat parcel as a candidate for subsurface mineral deposits. That survey had never been completed. In the intervening decades, preliminary geological studies of the surrounding region had identified the valley as sitting above a formation consistent with natural gas deposits. No extraction had occurred. No rights had been formally claimed. Because the surface title had remained unresolved, the mineral rights had remained attached to the deed, and the deed had remained sewn inside a quilt in my grandmother's bedroom. I sat in Arthur Abernathy's office with my hands in my lap and the canvas bag at my feet and tried to hold all of it at once. He said, "Titan Holdings knows about the geological survey. That's why they've been trying to buy the land. That's why Mr. Henderson has been running interference on the title search. So I asked him what we should do. He said, "We file the deed with the county recorder's office on Friday morning before Henderson can move to delay it again. And then we wait for Titan to come to you, because they will." They came 11 days later. 2 men arrived at Abernathy's office, one in a suit that had been tailored to fit him precisely, one in a sport coat who did the talking. The one who talked said he represented Titan Holdings and that his client had authorized a generous offer for the Heron's Flat parcel, given its remote location and the significant investment required to make it productive. He said the figure was $300,000. He said it was a strong offer for land that had been sitting unused for 2 decades. I looked at Abernathy. Abernathy looked at the table. I told them I needed time to think. The man in the tailored suit watched me with an expression that was not quite a smile. When they left, Abernathy poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of me and said simply, "They'll go higher." They went higher twice, $350,000, then $425,000. Each time they came back, the man in the sport coat's tone shifted slightly, less courteous, more precisely calibrated. He mentioned the cost of litigation. He mentioned the complexity of mineral rights law. He mentioned that an 18-year-old managing a 300-acre ranch alone was, in his phrasing, a significant undertaking. I thought about Eleanor, who had driven 40 minutes each way to bring me to school, who had sewn a deed into a quilt and written me a note that began with, "For Maya, when the time comes," who had trusted me to find it and to understand it and to wait. I told them no. On the 3rd week of April, Titan Holdings' lease on Heron's Flat expired. The title had been recorded in my name. The mineral rights were documented. Abernathy filed the paperwork that formally ended the lease agreement and notified Titan that the property would not be renewed. 2 days later, a representative from the state's Natural Resources Office contacted Abernathy directly. They were interested in entering a conversation about the mineral rights. Not a sale, a royalty arrangement, with the surface rights retained entirely by the landowner. The negotiation took 2 months. I drove out to Heron's Flat for the first time on a Saturday in late May, with Abernathy's hand-drawn directions on a piece of notepaper in my jacket pocket. I came around a long curve in the road, and the valley opened up below me, and I pulled over and got out of the truck I'd bought second-hand with part of the first royalty advance and stood at the edge of the road and looked at it. 340 acres of high-grass valley, rimmed on 3 sides by low ridgelines covered in sage and juniper. A creek ran along the western edge, catching the late afternoon light. The old ranch buildings, a main house, an equipment shed, a small barn, sat at the center of the property like they'd grown there, low and weathered and patient. I stood there for a long time. In the canvas bag on the passenger seat of the truck was Eleanor's quilt, folded carefully. The seam at the corner still worked loose where I'd first felt the paper inside. I'd been carrying it with me since I left her house. I didn't know exactly why. I think I knew I was supposed to bring it here. I spread it across the hood of the truck in the afternoon sun. It was a log cabin pattern, deep reds and navies and an ivory that had gone to cream with age. She'd made it the winter before I was born, she'd told me once. I had always assumed she made it for the bed. I understood now that she'd made it for this, for the moment when the seam came loose and the paper crinkled under my fingers and the valley came into view at the end of a long road. I sat on the hood of the truck with the quilt around my shoulders and watched the light move across Heron's Flat until the ridgelines went purple and the creek disappeared into shadow. The main house needed work. New roof sections, a re-poured section of foundation on the north side, window frames that had swelled and warped in 2 decades of wet winters. I spent the first summer learning what I didn't know, which was almost everything. and asking for help from people who were willing to give it. A woman named Martha at the diner in Callaway knew a contractor who charged fair. A man named Henry at the gas station on the county road knew which suppliers didn't inflate prices for newcomers. George at the hardware store let me run a tab when the royalty payments ran slow one month and didn't charge interest. I fixed the roof first, then the windows. Then I planted a kitchen garden on the south side of the house, where the soil was deepest and the sun stayed longest. By the time the first snow came, the main house was warm and dry, and mine in every sense of the word. There is a porch on the east side of the house that faces the valley. I sit there most evenings now, with coffee that is probably stronger than it needs to be, and watch the light change over the ridgelines. Some evenings, the creek catches the last of the sun before everything else goes dark, and it looks like a seam of something bright running through the valley floor. I think about Eleanor every time I see it. She spent 30 years keeping a secret she could have spent on herself. She could have sold that land when she needed money, or leased it at rates that would have made her comfortable. She chose not to. She chose to hold it and hide it and wait for me to be old enough to receive it. She stitched a deed into a quilt with the same patience she applied to everything. The long drives, the spare bedroom with the masking tape nameplate, the coffee strong enough to make you pay attention. What I know now is that some people don't show you they love you with words. They show you with the quality of their patience. They show you with the care they take to prepare something for a future they won't live to see. They show you by trusting that you'll come around the curve in the road and pull over and get out and understand, without anyone explaining it to you, that this was always yours. If you have ever found something hidden, a letter, a document, a key, a story, that someone left for you before they could tell you themselves, leave it in the comments. Tell me what it was. Tell me what it changed. I read every single one. Thank you for listening.